The man from the development company finished his presentation with a smile. The smile was the last slide. He clicked the remote, and the projector screen went a peaceful, promising blue. He wore a suit the color of a storm cloud, but his manner was all sunshine. The air in the county commission chambers was thick and still, tasting of old paper and lukewarm coffee. It was August. In this part of the country, August was not a month. It was a condition. He said, so, as you can see, the hydrological survey is clear. The aquifer has more than enough capacity for the Spring Creek Meadows development. We are ready to drill. He looked at the three commissioners behind the long wooden dais as if he were offering them a gift. One of them nodded slowly, already convinced. Another was studying the grain of the wood in front of him. The room was a study in tired acceptance. A few local real estate agents sat in the front row of folding chairs, phones on their laps, ready to begin selling lots that were still just dust and scrub brush. In the row behind them, two farmers who had already sold their land stared at the floor. They had taken the developer's money. Now they had come to watch the last piece fall. It was from the back of the room, near the door, that a voice spoke. It was not a loud voice. It was calm and clear, like water drawn from a deep well. Your survey is missing a line. The developer's smile didn't vanish. It froze. The commissioners looked up. The agents turned in their chairs. Every head swiveled toward the source of the sound. An old woman was standing. She wore simple denim trousers and a clean, pressed cotton shirt. Her hair was white and pulled back neatly. Her hands, resting on the back of the chair in front of her, were weathered and strong. She held a long cardboard tube, the kind architects use, capped at both ends. She was Clara Mills. She didn't wait for permission. She began to walk forward. Slow, controlled. Her work boots made almost no sound on the worn linoleum floor. The developer, a man named Hayes, watched her approach. His expression shifted from surprise to a kind of polished patience, the look of a man who handles minor obstacles for a living. He was accustomed to emotional outbursts at these meetings. He was prepared for anger, for tears, for pleas to think of the rural character of the valley. He was not prepared for this quiet, steady advance. He was not prepared for the cardboard tube. Clara reached the long table at the front of the room. She did not look at Hayes. She did not look at the commissioners. She looked at the empty space on the table in front of them. She placed the tube on the polished wood. The sound was a soft thud, but in the silent room, it landed like a gavel. One of the commissioners cleared his throat. "Ma'am, is there something you'd like to add during the public comment period?" Clara's eyes met his. Her gaze was level. "I would." She twisted the cap off one end of the tube. She tilted it, and a tightly rolled sheaf of old, yellowed paper slid out. It was a map. The man, Hayes, looked at her as one might look at a piece of antique furniture suddenly appearing in a modern office. He saw a woman who must have been past 70, her face a map of its own, drawn by sun and wind. He saw the dust on the cuffs of her trousers, the sturdiness of her worn boots. He saw an anachronism. His job was to deal with the future. Zoning variances, water permits, market projections. The past was a nuisance, a collection of faded documents and faded people who failed to understand that the world had moved on. The commission chairman, a man named Gable who ran the local hardware store, leaned forward. "Mrs. Mills, we appreciate you coming, but Mr. Hayes has presented a comprehensive report from a state-licensed geological firm. Their surveys are—" He searched for the word thorough. Clara had the map unrolled now, holding down the curling corners with her hands. She said, "They surveyed what the district told them to survey." The water district itself was a product of a crisis. It was born from the Great Drought of 1988, a year that was seared into the memory of everyone in that valley over the age of 50. Before 1988, water was a private matter, a thing you had or you didn't, drawn from the earth under your own feet. After 1988, water was a public resource managed and allocated by a board, a set of rules, and a thick binder of regulations. The drought had broken more than the land. It had broken the old ways. Hayes stepped closer to the table, his professional smile back in place. He spoke in a soothing, explanatory tone. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but all subsurface water rights in this basin were consolidated under the Water Management Act of 1991. The district was formed to ensure that what happened in '88 never happened again. It's for the good of the whole community. It means we all share the resource and we all share the responsibility." His words were smooth and reasonable. They were the words of progress. They were the words that had convinced her neighbors to sell. Clara ran a finger along a faint, spidery line on her old map. It traced the western edge of her property. It was a line that did not appear on the bright, digitally rendered maps on the projector screen moments before. "This is a recorded riparian exclusion," she said, "tied to the original 1907 land patent. It was filed with the county in 1923. It was never consolidated. Predates the district by 68 years. The room went quiet. The legal term, riparian exclusion, hung in the air. It was an old term from an old world. The Water Authority lawyer, a younger man sitting next to Hayes, frowned. He hadn't spoken yet. Now he leaned toward his microphone. "That's a historical designation, Mrs. Mills. Such claims were extinguished by the '91 Act. It established the district's authority as paramount." Clara said nothing. She just looked at the commissioners. She had presented her fact. It was their move. The stakes were simple. Her farm, the Mills farm, was the only one in the valley whose well had not gone dry in 1988. It was the reason she had never had to sell, the reason she was still here. Hayes and his company saw her 160 acres as the final, stubborn piece of a puzzle. With her land, their development would have frontage on the old county highway. Without it, their project was smaller, less profitable, hemmed in by an old woman's fence lines. More than that, her well was a problem for their calculations. A private well drawing from the same aquifer they planned to tap with a high-capacity pump was a variable they needed to control. Their plan was to buy her out, cap her well, and connect her to the municipal water line they planned to build, just like everyone else. They had made an offer, a generous one. She had told them no. Now they were trying to move forward without her, using the power of the water district to render her well, and her independence irrelevant. They believed the law was on their side. They believed history had been erased and rewritten in 1991. They assumed what was true for everyone else was also true for her. It was a reasonable assumption. It was also wrong. To understand why Clara Mills was standing in that room, you have to go back. Not just to the drought, but to the months just before this meeting. It had started with the appearance of small wooden stakes topped with orange plastic flags along her fence line. She knew what they were. Survey markers. She had seen them sprout on her neighbors' lands over the past 2 years. A strange, bright crop that grew just before the real estate signs went up. She watched the surveyors for a day, 2 men in hard hats and bright vests, sighting through their transits, oblivious to the history of the ground beneath their tripods. They were measuring the present. Clara was concerned with the past. That evening, she went out to the barn. It was the old barn, built by her husband's grandfather. The air inside was cool and smelled of hay and dry earth and thyme. In the back, in what used to be the tack room, was an old sea chest made of dark, heavy wood. It had been her husband John's. He had passed away 6 years ago. Inside were not memories in the sentimental sense, no photographs or letters. John Mills had not been a sentimental man. Inside were records, ledgers from the farm going back to the 1930s, deeds, tax receipts, and, in the corner, the cardboard tube. She had not opened it in years. She took it back to the house, to the kitchen table where she and John had made every important decision of their 47 years together. She slid the old map out and spread it under the warm light. She remembered John showing it to her decades earlier. He had tapped the same faint line she was now tracing with her own finger. Granddad called this the cedar line, he had said, because that's what he planted to mark it. A windbreak of eastern red cedar. He told me the trees would be the only map we'd ever need. Most people thought the long, dense row of cedar trees that marked the western boundary of the Mills farm was just a windbreak, planted to stop the soil from blowing away in the dry years. It was that, but it was also something more. It was a living monument to a forgotten agreement. The next day, Clara drove into town, to the county records office in the basement of the courthouse. It was a place of quiet, methodical work. The clerk at the counter was young, a girl who typed with incredible speed but who looked confused when Clara asked for plat maps from before 1950. "We have all that digitized," she said, pointing to a computer terminal. Clara shook her head. "I need to see the book." The girl had to ask an older woman, the county recorder herself, who came out from a back office. The recorder, a woman named Mary, had known Clara for years. She led her back to the archives, a climate-controlled room with rows of heavy, rolling shelves. They smelled of old paper and binder's glue. Mary found the right ledger. It was massive, bound in cracking leather, the pages thick as cardstock. There, filed in 1923, was the record of the exclusion. It was an amendment to the original deed, citing a water right granted by the railroad in the 1890s in exchange for a right-of-way. The railroad needed water for its steam engines. The original homesteader, John's great-uncle, had a spring. They made a deal. The spring was long gone, dried up in the 50s, but the legal right it established, the right to the water that fed it, drawn from a specific, defined subsurface basin, had been meticulously preserved on paper. It had been recorded as an encumbrance on the land title, separate from the land itself. It was an old and unusual filing. So unusual that when the county digitized its records in the 1990s, the young technician doing the data entry had likely not understood what it was. It was never transferred to the new digital system. It existed only here in this heavy book and on the old map in Clara's cardboard tube. Clara spent 3 weeks in that basement. She read everything. She made copies. She sat at a small wooden table and filled a spiral notebook with dates, file numbers, and legal descriptions. She was not a lawyer. She was a farmer. But she knew how to do slow, patient work. She knew how to read the land, and she learned how to read the language that defined it. She was preparing, not for a fight, for a clarification. She was not there to argue. She was there to present a fact that everyone else had forgotten. A fact that had been sleeping in a ledger for nearly a century. A fact that was about to stop a $1 million development cold. The root of it all was the drought of 1988. That was the year the sky fell silent. The clouds came, but they were high and thin, ghosts of clouds that promised nothing. The fields turned from green to yellow to a brittle, uniform brown. The creeks shrank, leaving cracked mud plates curling in the sun. The sound of the valley changed. The whisper of wind through corn became a dry rustle. The lowing of cattle grew anxious. Then, one by one, the wells began to fail. It started with the shallow wells, the ones dug by hand a generation ago. Then the deeper ones, the drilled wells, began to suck air. Neighbors gathered at fence lines, their talk always turning to the water table, a thing they had never seen but had always trusted. They spoke of it like a faithless friend. 20 feet down, 40 feet, gone. Men who had never accepted help in their lives were now buying water, trucking it in, just to keep their families and their animals alive. The Mills's well was different. It was deep, drilled into a granite seam that followed the old spring line. While others saw their levels drop daily, the Mills's well held. It wasn't untouched. The water level fell, but it never fell to zero. John Mills would check it every morning. He would lower a weighted line and listen. He never showed fear. He showed respect. He understood the water was not a guarantee. It was a gift. He and Clara practiced a quiet conservation, using only what they needed, letting the lawn go brown, recycling water from the house to the garden. One evening, sitting on the porch watching a heat lightning storm flicker silently on the horizon, John had talked about the cedars. "My grandfather told me those trees have deep roots. They know where the water is. He planted them right over the vein. He said this line of water was separate from the rest of the valley, a different source. He said as long as the cedars lived, we'd have water." It had sounded like folklore then, a farmer's story passed down through generations. But John's grandfather had been a practical man. He had not planted those trees on a myth. He had planted them on a legal fact, the one recorded in the county ledger. He had made the boundary of his water right visible on the surface of the earth. He had planted a fence of living trees. Some things are planted for the next man, John had said that night. The drought broke the following spring, as all droughts eventually do. But the valley was changed forever. Trust in the old ways was gone. People wanted security. They wanted a system, and so the water district was born. It was a logical response to a shared trauma. The new rules were meant to be fair. Everyone would be metered. Everyone would be regulated. Large-scale use would require permits and geological surveys. It made sense. In the years that followed, no one questioned the district's authority. The memory of the dust was too strong. The individual rights of the past were surrendered for the collective security of the future. No one, it seemed, had checked the old books. No one had remembered the story of a deal with a railroad, a hidden spring, and a line of cedar trees. No one except the family that had lived by that line for 3 generations. John had made sure Clara knew the story. He had shown her the papers. It wasn't a secret. It was just quiet knowledge held in reserve. He had collected patience. He had taught it to her. He had known, in the way a farmer knows the weather, that a day would come when a piece of paper from 1923 would be more important than all the rain in the sky. He had been planting for her. Back in the commission chambers, the air was tight with unspoken questions. The water authority lawyer, whose name was Dresden, took off his glasses and polished them with a handkerchief. It was a gesture designed to buy time, to show he was considering the matter with calm professionalism. He represented the institution, and the institution did not like surprises. He put his glasses back on. He said, "Mrs. Mills, I have the utmost respect for your family's history on that land. But the legal principle of preemption is quite clear. A comprehensive regulatory scheme established by the state, in this case the Water Management Act, supersedes prior local statutes and private agreements. That is the basis of the district's authority." It was the first argument, the legal one. He was citing established doctrine. He was confident. He was also treating her map as a historical curiosity, not a binding legal document. He had not actually looked at it closely. Clara did not respond with a legal argument of her own. She did not need to. She reached into the large canvas bag at her feet and pulled out a faded file folder. From it, she took another document. It was the original deed, the paper thick and fibrous, the typewritten words slightly blurry, the signatures at the bottom written in a confident, looping script. She laid it on the table next to the map. She did not open it. She simply placed her finger on the seal of the county recorder, stamped in faded blue ink in the bottom corner. The stamp was dated April 12, 1923. Then she looked at the lawyer and spoke one clean sentence. This was not a local statute or a private agreement. She paused. It was a recorded, perfected property right, filed with the state and county before the land was incorporated into this township. It runs with the title. It was never subject to the act because this water was never part of the basin as legally defined. The lawyer, Dresden, leaned forward to look at the document. He squinted. The confidence in his posture ebbed slightly. He was seeing the official seal, the file number. He was seeing something real, something that existed within his world of legal filings, not just in the memory of an old woman. He was a lawyer. He understood what a perfected property right meant. It meant it was not an agreement. It was an asset as real as the land itself. An asset the state could not simply regulate away without due process and compensation. Compensation they had certainly never offered, because they had never known it existed. The developer, Hayes, saw his lawyer hesitate. He stepped in, shifting tactics. This was his second argument, the appeal to emotion and the greater good. "Mrs. Mills," he began, his voice softening, becoming folksy and reasonable. "Clara, we're not trying to take anything from you. We are trying to build a community, new homes for young families, a stronger tax base for our schools. The valley needs this. We all want to see our community grow and prosper, don't we? Surely we can find a solution that works for everyone." He was trying to paint her as selfish, an enemy of progress, a person standing in the way of children and schools and the future. It was a powerful argument, and in other meetings it had always worked. It made the opposition feel small, unreasonable. Clara looked at him. Her expression did not change. It is not a community if it is built on a mistake. Her voice was still quiet, but it cut through his performance. The line is the line. The water follows it. You can build your homes, but you cannot drill on our water. It was a simple, immovable statement. No anger. No negotiation. Just a fact. Like a stone wall. Hayes's smile was gone now. The charm had failed. The appeal to community had failed. He was a salesman whose product had been rejected. He fell back on the one tool he had left. Money. This was his third and final argument. Look, he said, his voice now crisp and businesslike. Let's be practical. This is clearly a complicated issue, an oversight from long ago. We are prepared to rectify that. Right now. He pulled a checkbook from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. We can offer you a significant sum for the water right. A very significant sum. Enough to ensure you never have to worry about a thing. Or, if you prefer, we will pay to drill you a new well, deeper than any in the valley, and guarantee your water supply for life at our expense. He was trying to turn it into a transaction. He was reducing a century of history, a grandfather's foresight, a family's survival into a dollar amount. He believed, as many people in his position do, that everything has a price. He was making his final offer. He thought he was being generous. The commissioners watched Clara. The real estate agents in the front row leaned forward. This was a language they understood. They were waiting for the negotiation, for the number. But Clara Mills did not look at the checkbook. She looked at Hayes. For the first time, there was a flicker of something other than calm in her eyes. It was not anger. It was a kind of profound disappointment. She spoke again, her voice as steady as before. Mr. Hayes, some things are planted for the next man. My husband's grandfather planted those trees to mark a promise. My husband tended them. Now I tend them. The water under them is not for sale. Not for any price. Silence. A deep, profound silence filled the room. The developer had played his last card, and it was refused. Not countered. Refused. The very idea was alien to him. He slowly put the checkbook back into his pocket. His jacket seemed to hang on him a little less perfectly than it had an hour ago. The water authority lawyer, Dresden, stared at the old deed on the table. He knew what a losing hand looked like. He had just been dealt one from a deck he hadn't even known was in play. He had prepared for every contingency except the one that was written in faded ink on a 70-year-old piece of paper. The confidence of the institution, the polished language, the assumption that what had always been done must be legally correct. It all dissolved in the quiet certainty of one woman who had done her homework. She had not come to argue. She had come to inform. And she was done. The commission chairman, Mr. Gable, looked from Clara to Hayes and back again. He was a hardware store owner, a man who dealt in tangible things. Nuts and bolts, lengths of pipe, bags of cement. He was out of his depth. This was a matter of law, of history. He made the only sensible decision he could. He called a recess. Then he turned to a man who had been sitting quietly against the side wall for the entire meeting. He was older than Clara, dressed in a plaid shirt and clean jeans. He had said nothing. He had simply listened. It was Henry Peterson, the county surveyor. He had held the position for 43 years. He had surveyed nearly every parcel of land in the valley at one time or another. Gable said, "Henry, could you take a look at this?" Peterson stood up and walked to the table. He moved with the slow, deliberate economy of a man who has spent his life walking over uneven ground. He nodded to Clara. He picked up her map and studied it, his eyes tracing the lines his predecessors had drawn 2 generations before him. Then he looked at the deed. He didn't use a magnifying glass. His eyes were still sharp. He read the legal description of the exclusion clause twice. He said nothing. He walked over to the modern digital mapping station in the corner of the room, a computer and a large monitor that the younger surveyors used. He typed a few commands. The official county plat map appeared on the screen, the one Hayes had used in his presentation. Peterson stared at it. Then he went back to the table and looked at Clara's old map again. He walked back to the computer. He typed something else. He was looking for a digital ghost, the trace of a record that had failed to transfer. He found nothing. Finally, he turned and walked toward a door at the back of the chambers. It led to the records vault. He was gone for what felt like a very long time. In the meeting room, no one spoke. Hayes stood stiffly, staring at the empty projector screen. His lawyer, Dresden, was quietly tapping on his phone, likely searching for precedents on riparian rights. The commissioners whispered among themselves. Clara simply stood by the table, her hands resting near her map. She waited. She was good at waiting. The sound of the vault door opening made everyone look up. Peterson returned. He was carrying a large, heavy book. It was the original survey ledger from 1922 to 1925. He placed it on the table with a heavy thud and opened it to a marked page. The page was covered in spidery, elegant handwriting and a hand-drawn map of the township. He ran his finger along a line, and then he spoke. His voice was gravelly, unused to public speaking, but it was clear. He looked at the commission chairman. He said, "The exclusion is valid." He then looked at the lawyer. It was recorded in the survey ledger in 1922 and filed with the deed in 23. It was never extinguished. The digital transfer in 94 missed it. Clerical error. He closed the book. That ended it. One sentence from a man whose job was not to interpret the law, but simply to say where the lines were. And he had found the line. The one that was missing. It had been there all along. The institutional collapse was quiet. There was no shouting, no grand confrontation. There was only the sudden, awkward silence of a position that had been completely undermined. Hayes looked at his lawyer, Dresden, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. The fight was over. An appeal was possible, of course. But challenging a perfected, recorded property right based on a clerical error made by the county itself was a long, expensive, and likely losing battle. The foundation of their entire legal argument, that the district's authority was absolute, had crumbled. Dresden was the first to adapt. He was a lawyer. His job was to manage risk and find solutions. He turned to Clara, his tone now respectful, deferential. "Mrs. Mills," he said softly, "clearly, there has been a significant oversight. We apologize for that. Perhaps, given this new information, we could discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. An easement, perhaps. We would be willing to compensate you fairly for access, and we could place the well on the far side of your property. We can work around this." He was trying to salvage something. He was negotiating now, not dictating. He was asking. Clara looked at him. She had already answered this question. She gave him the same answer. No, the line is the line. Her refusal was not hostile. It was absolute. There was nothing left to discuss. The land and the water were connected. The right was not something to be sold off in pieces. It was a whole thing, and she was its keeper. The chairman, Mr. Gable, seemed relieved to have a clear path. He tapped his microphone. It squeaked. He cleared his throat and spoke in his official voice. "In light of this documentation, the permit application for the Spring Creek Meadows well is hereby denied, pending a full review of the title and water rights associated with Parcel 7A. This meeting is adjourned." He tapped a small wooden gavel on its base. The sound was soft, final. The show was over. Hayes and Dresden packed their expensive leather briefcases. They did not look at Clara. They did not look at anyone. They walked out of the room, their shoulders slightly stooped. The real estate agents began to murmur, their phones suddenly out, the nature of their calls now entirely different. The other attendees filed out slowly, some of them glancing at the old woman with the map, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. Clara took her time. She carefully, gently rolled up the old survey map. The paper was fragile. She slid it back into its cardboard tube and secured the cap. She placed the original deed back in its folder. She picked up her canvas bag. From a pocket, she took a small, spiral-bound notebook and a pen. She flipped to a clean page and wrote a single word. Done. Then she turned and walked out of the county commission chambers, her work boots making a steady, even sound on the linoleum floor. She did not look back. That evening, the sun set over the valley, casting long shadows from the line of old cedar trees. Clara Mills stood by the fence, her hand resting on the rough, fragrant bark of one of the largest trees, a tree that had been a sapling when the promise was first made. The wind, cool now after the heat of the day, moved through the dense needles, making a sound like a soft exhalation. The air smelled of dust and cedar and dry grass. Smelled like home. She stood there for a long time, watching the light fade from the sky. The world was quiet. There was no celebration. There was no one to congratulate her. The victory was not a public spectacle. It was a private affirmation, a quiet settling of a long account. It was the feeling of a crooked thing being made straight again. She thought of John. She could almost feel him there beside her. His solid presence, his quiet confidence in the land, in the trees, in her. He had never doubted that the line would hold. He had simply made sure the map survived. She spoke, her voice a whisper carried away by the wind, meant only for him and for the trees. I told them, John, the line holds. She gave the tree one last pat, a gesture of thanks, and then turned to walk back toward the small farmhouse, its windows glowing with warm light. Some men collect problems. John Mills collected patience. He planted it in a straight line of trees, a living deed for a day he knew would surely come, for a woman he knew would be ready. The water was safe. The farm was safe. The promise was kept. If the story stayed with you, know that the archives are full of them. Next time, we travel to the high desert of Nevada, where a single silver dollar from 1884 sits in a dusty evidence box. It was used to purchase a mining claim that the federal government now says never existed. But a retired geologist believes he can prove that the coin is more than currency. It's a contract, stamped in silver. Stay with us.